Hello and welcome back or welcome to our ISNTD Festival. We've come to our last but one of my favorite panels of this festival, which is our book panel, and a chance to meet the author on some of the recent writing that has come out on and around neglected tropical diseases. And it's my great honor today to have the pleasure of welcoming our three authors who will be talking to us about cutaneous leishmaniasis, schistosomiasis, and dengue. So we've got about an hour ahead of us. I haven't taken my own advice, which was to bring a nice cup of tea or a coffee and to just really enjoy having this wonderful chat with our authors. But nonetheless, I'm sure it's going to be a really great session ahead of us. And so without any further delay, I'd like to introduce our panelists. I'm sure you've recognized them. They've been involved in ISNTD before, although Pip, we had a narrow miss because I think 2 years ago at our festival, we wanted to have you over, but you were expecting a baby. So it's okay.
Yeah,
we let you off the hook that time.
Sorry.
So
Labour.
Yeah. Well, Pip Stewart, you're an explorer. And of course, not only did you have a baby, but you've been keeping really busy nonetheless. Now you've written a book to chart your adventures in the Amazon, but also kind of on the flip side of that, unfortunately, your journey as well with a cutaneous leishmaniasis infection. So we're really honored, and it's very kind of you to come and speak to us, not just about your book, but from the perspective of an affected person as well. So thank you for that. We're also delighted to welcome Dr. Somia Iqtadar. Somia, hello. You are a doctor at the King Edward Medical University in Pakistan, in Lahore. You're also a dengue expert, and you've come to talk to us today about your recent updated book called Dengue Us. Nice to see you again, Somia.
Thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to interact with so many people.
Thank you. And last but not least, Professor Alan Fenwick. Many of you won't need an introduction to Alan, and particularly we did have our session, our ISNTD Connect, which really focused on your book at the time of its recent launch back in January. Alan, it's really nice to see you again, and we never tire to hear of the incredible wealth and breadth of anecdotes and stories and learnings that you always have to share about what is really a lifetime in schistosomiasis. So welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Marianne. I always enjoy the opportunity of standing up with a microphone in my hand and telling a story.
Well, that's great for us because we love hearing them as well. Okay, well, you've the three of you have brought very different perspectives to writing about diseases. The formats of your books are slightly different, and the tone as well. And so perhaps I'll turn to Pip first and foremost. You don't have a medical background, I believe, unlike Alan and Somia. And so you are an explorer, which is a really fascinating background and occupation. And so perhaps if you wouldn't mind to start, you could tell us a little bit about your background and then how this brought you to writing a book.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. And as you say, yes, I am not a medic, or I'm not involved in any of the science of it. So I am absolutely in awe to be on this panel because of the amazing work that everyone's doing. But yeah, so I came at neglected tropical diseases from a patient perspective. I'm a journalist by training. And I realized over a couple of years that my favorite way of telling stories were human-powered journeys, whether this was cycling back from Malaysia to London, or more recently, I did a world-first kayaking expedition from source to sea of Guyana's Essequibo River. Along the way, I picked up, as you mentioned, cutaneous leishmaniasis. And that, for me, was the start of this whole journey into NTDs and the incredible work that you guys do, because I had no idea about the breadth and scale of the problem. And so, yeah, when I came about to writing the book of this expedition, obviously a lot of the book is about the expedition and the dynamics of that. But something I felt really passionately about is I wanted an emphasis on leishmaniasis and NTDs because I was absolutely bowled over by the scale of the problem. So the very last chapter is called Death and Life. And it is all about the treatment that I experienced coming back from expedition, because for me, that was the continuation of this incredible 3-month journey through the jungle, was just going through the treatment process and being told, you know, you have to have a very outdated form of chemotherapy that dates from the 1940s. Meanwhile, I'm messaging some of the people we met back in Guyana, and my friend Faye is telling me that in order to treat leishmaniasis where she lives, which is very remote on the river, you know, 6 weeks away from the nearest like sort of hospital, she was like, well, I put burning cow fat into my lesions to kind of sear out the parasite. Or one of my friends in a village called Masakanara in Guyana was saying that the local treatment is to use crushed turtle shell and sort of smear that into the lesions. And I was thinking, how in the 21st century are the choices between crushed turtle shell, burning yourself with cow fat, or a very outdated form of chemotherapy? There's something majorly wrong here. And that's not to say local treatments aren't effective, because they may be. But I was completely confused by the fact that there's not been that much research into whether it works and why it works if it does. So, yeah, it was sort of this whole unraveling, and it was something that I wanted to get across. And, you know, when I write, I try to write in quite a chipper, upbeat way. So trying to get across the severity of the disease and just the grim nature of the treatment. And bearing in mind, I was privileged enough to get treatment. You know, I could walk into London's Hospital for Tropical Diseases. I was seen by world experts pretty much immediately and for free. And I'm contrasting that with my friends who, you know, made the expedition possible. This couldn't have been done without our guides and Guyana's YY indigenous community, and the lack of access. And I think, you know, often I'm asked about what was most scary in the jungle. And for me, it was actually the global healthcare inequality, because I'm like, yeah, you know, we're encountering jaguars and snakes and spiders and scorpions, but it just seems so morally wrong that I could come back and get treatment and my friends are burning themselves. So yeah, that was sort of the basis of the book, and trying to make people who don't know much about these diseases, even though they're so prevalent, and I'm guessing I'm talking about people in the global north particularly, make people care.
That's really a sobering account. I think that is what we hear a lot from, as you say, affected persons from the global north, really driving home this inequality. And that's really interesting. By way of background, I think it's clear that you've become quite a strong advocate for this disease, and sort of trying to bring the treatments either up to date or to those in need of them, and also to raise the awareness across those numerous communities and countries where people have probably never even heard of cutaneous leishmaniasis. And I'm sure that that kind of effort is something that rings very close to your heart, Alan, having spent 4 or more decades doing this very same journey for schistosomiasis. I'm not sure if you ever actually contracted schistosomiasis at some point, but certainly you've been a...
Let me tell you about, possibly you don't know, and possibly you do. There was a very, very severe outbreak of cutaneous leishmaniasis in Omdurman, north of Khartoum. I'm just trying to think when it was. I think it must have been about 1995, something like that. But literally during Ramadan, when it's very hot, everybody is very sociable. And what they do is they go out in the streets with food at sunset, and with the Muslim religion, they break their fast. And all the people in the area wear jalabiyas, which is like a nightdress. But of course, the sandflies can go up and bite them in the legs. and an amazing number of people had these horrible sores. And the treatment was exactly the opposite of the one you described. The medics in Khartoum used to drop liquid nitrogen on the bite with the idea that it would burn, but burn with coldness instead of burn with heat and kill the parasite. Sadly, it wasn't particularly effective. And some of the sores that I came across at that time were quite horrendous. Well,
yeah, absolutely.
This is my book, which people might have seen because I've tried to publicize it a little bit on Facebook and on LinkedIn, and also through your good auspices in January. It's basically something because I wanted to celebrate what I think is an incredibly successful journey that the pioneers of neglected tropical diseases have gone through over a period really of only 20 years. In the year 2000, there was a chemotherapy program against onchocerciasis, river blindness, which had been very successful as a result of the drug Mectizan being donated by Merck in America. But there were another 4 or 5 tropical diseases which were incredibly common. Schistosomiasis, which was mostly in Africa, but there were spots in both China and in South America where there was also schistosomiasis. Then there was trachoma, which is blindness. There were a number of us who had all been carrying out research and doing small-scale control programs in different countries against sleeping sickness, against river blindness, lymphatic filariasis, schistosomiasis, and intestinal worms. But the extent of the people infected that we had come up against was 1 in 6 in the human population. That's over 1 billion people were infected with one or other, or sometimes multi-infected with these 6 or 7 parasites. And yet, against each of these parasites, we had a drug which only and there were different drugs for different parasites. They only had to be delivered once a year, and they were relatively inexpensive. But relatively inexpensive, the key word is relatively, because while we could afford to buy it very simply in the UK, people in Africa, which is where I spent most of my life, but also in Asia and in other infected areas, just couldn't afford to buy the drug, and the drugs weren't available. In the year 2000, there was hardly a single school health program in Africa. And so the 3 or 4 of us, the NTD champions, I call them, including David Molyneux and Lorenzo Savioli and Dirk Engels at WHO, and then a couple of parasitologists in America, Peter Hotez and Eric Otterson, all got together, and we went, strangely enough, individually, without a targeted approach, to Bill Gates. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation had only started in about 1999. And his first big money went to Gavi, which was going to be vaccinating people all over Africa. And so we each went in turn and discussed with him and his team about the cost effectiveness of treating neglected tropical diseases, because we did a rough back of the envelope calculation and worked out that we could actually treat people for 50 cents per person per year. And I must admit, I think he was a little bit impressed with that amount of money. And so we did each get money from him. I was very fortunate. I was able to start the Schistosomiasis Control Initiative at Imperial College in London, which included treating schistosomiasis and intestinal worms. And we used 2 drugs, praziquantel and albendazole. And Bill Gates, over a period of 8 years, invested over $50 million in the SCI. And as a result of the period that he funded us, we were treating 50 million children every year. Since since his money stopped, which was in about 2006, 2007, we had all got together, these NTD champions, and we started approaching the British and the American governments. And they then stepped into the breach and came up with what for us was relatively large amounts of money, $100 million initially from USAID, and I think 200 million pounds sterling from the British government followed shortly. And then the American government put in more. And then in the year 2012, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with the World Health Organization had a huge conference in London. And at that conference, all the CEOs of the pharmaceutical companies which manufactured those drugs which we were using promised to give as many drugs as we needed for as long as we needed, free of charge, providing that we would organize the delivery of them. And the donations increased year by year until in the year 2017, we reached our target of delivering a billion treatments using donated drugs through the Ministries of Health and Ministries of Education in all the countries in sub-Saharan Africa and in many of the countries in Asia to control these neglected tropical diseases. And in fact, today there are a number of countries in Africa which have stopped treating, particularly against lymphatic filariasis and river blindness, because those diseases have been brought under control. So basically what I tried to do with this book, and I have to admit I did concentrate on schistosomiasis and intestinal helminths, but certainly gave some very, I think, positive mentions to the other diseases and the other colleagues, so that we could tell the story of going from virtually zero treatment of 200 million infected people in sub-Saharan Africa to the situation today where 1 billion treatments of all the neglected tropical diseases are delivered, and nearly 100 million doses every year are delivered against schistosomiasis. Now, what you did say, and in this book, I do cover rather more of my life than just the 20 years of SCI, because I started it off as a textbook, and I asked a medical journalist called Becky McCall if she would like to write it, because she was looking for a task to do in her secondary education. And she interviewed me, and I told her all these stories and what we were doing and what we were trying to do and the difficulties we'd come across. And she started writing them down. And then somehow we got stalled. I think it could well have been that Becky's life changed. She went through a different stage in her life, and maybe I got a bit bored about it all. But about 5 years later, CABI, which is the Commonwealth Agricultural Bureau, a scientific publishing house, they came to me and they said, "Hey, we said we would publish this book. Where is it?" And so I decided that I would try and fatten it out and make it into a more interesting read. And the team that I worked with in SCI, I was always telling stories to them in the evenings about coincidences and funny stories and what have you. And they said, "Well, put them in the book." So I have put a few stories in the book. Quite a lot of those people come to me and said, "Oh, I'm really looking forward to the book." And I think, did I put you in the book or did I not? And maybe I didn't. And so I felt bad about it. But Marianne, you said to me you'd like me to read you out one of those stories. And so if you've got a couple of minutes, I'll do that now. This is a story that goes back to 2008, when the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation were persuaded by a company called Rockhopper to fund a series of 8 television programs which would go out on the BBC World Service. And at the time, the Gates Foundation were apparently reluctant to fund a commercial organization. So they said they would only give the money to me, and then I would pass it through, and I would be the sort of scientific director, if you like, on the project. So I agreed that I would do that, and there were a number of different issues covered. It included malaria, sleeping sickness, air pollution, maternal health, child health, schistosomiasis, and hookworm. Obviously, schisto was the one I was particularly interested in. And in order to publish this, they got the BBC to allocate a program with Stephen Sackur, who called Hard Talk. I don't know whether any of you have seen Hard Talk on the TV. It's normally very political, but they asked me if I would go there and publicize these eight programs, which I did. And then we got a message from our Gates Foundation, from our Gates Foundation sponsor, who said, "How are you going to evaluate what we've managed to achieve with these 8 programs? And what's your plan?" And I had to say that, well, actually, I'd missed that little bit about our contract, and I didn't have a plan. And anyway, how can we possibly evaluate what people in Japan or Germany or Singapore have gained from watching these BBC programs? So they said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll fly you and Richard Wilson, who was the owner of Rockhopper, over to Washington, and we'll have a discussion about how we can evaluate this program. This is a bit of a shaggy dog story, but I won't take much longer. And so we did. We flew out there, and the Gates lady, who's called Kathy, came up with this idea. She said, "Why don't you use Ipsos Mori?" Now, Sonia, I don't know whether you know Ipsos Mori, but they are a big evaluation and prediction company in the UK, and they predict who's going to win the general election and things like that. Usually they don't predict it very well, but they do nevertheless do evaluations. And she said that actually the European manager of Ipsos Mori is currently in Seattle talking to Bill Gates because he wants to get a big contract from Bill Gates about something nothing to do with NTDs. But if he gets this contract, why don't we suggest that for the small amount of money, they do this evaluation for us? So I said, well, that sounded like a good idea. And Kathy said she'd fly back to Seattle, and Richard and I would fly back to the UK, and she would contact this man, Richard Silmer, who was the European manager of Ipsos Mori, and ask him if he would be willing to do this evaluation. So I said, well, that sounds great. And she said, well, if he will, I'll get him to contact you. So I, with Richard, flew back to the UK, and on the Monday morning, I got a letter, an email from her saying that Richard had agreed that he would do this and he would be contacting me later in the day. And he did contact me, and he said, Alan, I've heard all about what you want to do. Can we somehow meet up in London, or you can come to my offices and we sign a contract and we will do the evaluation for you. And I said, no, that's brilliant. Thank you. When can we do it? So he said, well, can you come tomorrow morning? Unfortunately, and I didn't tell him this, unfortunately, I had a golf game arranged the following morning, and it was a knockout competition. So it wasn't just an ordinary little game. So I said to him, look, I really can't come on Tuesday morning, but I could come Tuesday afternoon. And he said, no. He said, that's no good, because at midday on Tuesday, I'm flying to Stuttgart for a week. So I said, oh, all right, well, maybe we can do it when you come back. It won't be a big disaster. So he said, okay. So I told Margaret this, my wife, and she said, I didn't know you were playing golf on Tuesday morning and sloping off work. And I said, well, I was going to mention it at some time. So she said, well, who's going to walk the dog on Tuesday morning? So I said, well, I'll get up early and walk the dog. So at 6 o'clock on Tuesday morning, I set off into the field walking the dog. It was dawn, and normally I would meet up with a group of friends at 7:30, but at 6 o'clock I didn't expect to meet anyone. But I did. There was this guy with a rather fierce-looking dog coming along on a lead. But the two dogs sort of sniffed each other, and I said to the guy, I said, well, why don't we let the dogs romp around? So he said, okay, and we undid the hatch, and the two dogs went romping around. So I said to him, I've never met you before, and I've never met your dog before. He says, no, he says, I live 2 streets this side of the field. I actually live 2 streets the other side. And he said, sometimes I come to this field and sometimes I go the other way. I said, wow, you're really early. He said, yes, I am early. He says, but the problem is I'm flying to Stuttgart at midday. I said, your name not Richard Silman by any chance, is it? And he looked at me in total amazement. He said, how on earth did you know that? I said, well, I've been trying to get in touch with the Richard Silman and he's flying to Stuttgart at midday. He said, are you Alan? I said, yes. And we live literally 4 streets from each other. And we've dined out on that story, many, many times ever since. Fortunately, he signed the contract there and then, and Ipsos Mori evaluated the TV programs. So there we are. That's page 178 in the book. So the book has got a few of those anecdotes in it, but it's also got a really serious message that we can actually make a huge difference if we can get the collaboration of the Ministries of Health, the Ministries of Education, financial donors, and the pharmaceutical industry in order to control neglected tropical diseases. So there you are. I've talked for too long, Marianne.
No, it's hard to avoid with so many anecdotes and so much life experience. And I think the other thing that your book really shows, because it's very personal, and some people might be surprised at how much you do share, but that we probably hear a lot about health, global health programs in a very kind of formal manner, but your book really shows very nicely how behind all this, as you say, there's people walking their dogs, and there's chance encounters and meetings, and there's just the whole kind of very humanist fabric behind all of these initiatives. And at the end of the day, we are talking about very serious diseases, and a lot of people who work on them just actually put their heart into it more than anything. So it's a wonderful read, highly recommended. Something that's very common to both you and Pip is kind of also this notion of bringing the treatment to the affected communities, perhaps the issue of access. And I think that's a great moment to turn to Somia, who is the doctor amongst us and is kind of in the front line most days, very involved with COVID recently, but since 2012, when a big dengue outbreak hit Pakistan, Somia, you've also been very much at the forefront. Well, there is no treatment for dengue apart from management of the cases, but you have really been there trying to bring these successful treatments in very difficult conditions. Outbreaks are hard to manage in terms of the time scales and the volumes of patients and so forth. And this is what you've been navigating and kind of where you come to this. And so we'd be really interested to hear what's your journey been to your book, Dengue Us.
Okay. Thank you, Marianne. Actually, Pakistan didn't have much of the dengue before 2011. We did have few cases every year or so, but they were negligible in number and they never surfaced as a major epidemic. Although it was present in Pakistan for about 25-30 years ago, but in 2011, suddenly there was a rise in number of febrile patients coming onto the hospital emergencies. This was the month of June and July, which is the post-monsoon rainy period. And suddenly there were all the emergencies, especially in the capital of province Punjab, which is the most populated country, was filled with patients coming with high-grade fever, and actually doctors didn't know what is wrong with them. when they started testing, it came out to be that these patients have low platelet counts and low WBC count, and they have fever and very non-specific symptoms. Some are coming with high-grade fever, body aches and pain. Some are coming with vomiting. Some just come collapsed and they've expired. So it was a very, very terrible situation at that time of this year. About 0.6 million suspected dengue cases and 22,000 lab confirmed cases. Before this, we never had an epidemic of this much magnitude, and we didn't know much about the disease because we didn't had any experience of coping with the magnitude, with an epidemic of this magnitude. And most of the people, they just knew that this is a disease which is caused by mosquito. Now we know that this small mosquito is responsible for so many of the diseases, including chikungunya and then Zika, and of course dengue and West Nile fever, and so many arboviral diseases are responsible for causing a major burden of zoonotic diseases in our country. So this little mosquito which causes dengue, then we came to know that it is such a, problematic. It is the fastest growing tropical infectious disease, which is responsible for 400 million infections every year and about 500,000 hospitalizations every year. And many people, they lose their life. And because we didn't know much about this disease in the beginning, we didn't have an experience of dealing with dengue epidemic before. So all our efforts were basically concentrated on mosquito control, which seemed like impossible. We didn't have the support of an entomologist. We didn't have the support of a system in place to control the mosquitoes and the larvae. And we didn't know much about the disease because it was a new disease. The doctors didn't know how to treat dengue because they had never seen patients of dengue. They've just read it in the textbooks many years ago, but actually they had not seen any patients, so they didn't actually know how to treat these cases. But then we were very fortunate that we got some support from our neighboring countries, especially in the Southeast Asia, where it is endemic to dengue. And about a team of about 10 to 12 people, they arrived in the epidemic situation. We got help from Sri Lanka, from Malaysia, from Indonesia, from Singapore. And then they, in the light of their experience, taught us how to tackle this problem, which was at hand. So they helped us on the vector surveillance side, and they also helped us on the medical side in teaching and training of the doctors and telling us what goes wrong at what stage and how should we have a system in place for tackling this problem. That's when we formed the Dengue Expert Advisory Group. This is a group of people, majorly the people who are involved are clinicians who develop the guidelines and the clinical management protocols for the patients of dengue suspected, then turn into probable and confirmed cases. And then they train the doctors countrywide so that everybody knows what this disease is, how to manage it. But that 2012, 11 and start of the 12 epidemic was so catastrophic that we lost 375 precious lives. And people were so afraid of this new disease. Everybody who got fever would panic and run to the hospital because, as the name says, dengue and dengue hemorrhagic fever, they always thought that we are going to bleed and die ultimately. And the platelet counts, which is one of the cells in your blood which helps you in clotting of the blood, they go very, very low. And even we had platelet counts of 10,000. The normal is 150,000. And even we had platelet count of 0 on the readings, which was very alarming. So people were, getting platelet transfusions, getting blood transfusion. And whenever there's something new which is not established as a disease in a country and there is less knowledge about the disease, then then the myths and the shortcuts and the advice from the older people, it comes in. I was just listening to the previous speakers who said that, the shell of the turtle was used for cutaneous leishmaniasis. And similarly, other these myths, which are alternative medicines, they come into place. So the people, they got some, I'm sure, the Google search or internet search, and they got to know that The papaya leaf extract is the cure for dengue. And this actually came from Thailand and Sri Lanka, where there has been dengue for many decades. And they would just crush this papaya leaf and make it it's like a solution, and then just take it 2 to 3 tablespoons 3 to 4 times in a day. And they believe that the platelet counts would start rising and it will cure them, which actually happened in some of the Q cases, because the papaya leaf extract has a chemical which increases your cell counts. But increasing your cell counts is not the cure of dengue. The dengue is a problem in which there is the simple dengue fever. It's just a viral illness which gets better in 5 to 7 days. But the complicated phase of the dengue is in which there is plasma leakage, and you have to maintain the fluid balance of the patient by giving fluids and maintaining the intake and the output chart. And if the patient is bleeding, you need to give blood transfusions. And you need to document where the patient is leaking, whether it is in your abdomen or in your chest, and then infuse the fluids accordingly and prevent the patients going into shock due to bleeding or leakage. So papaya leaf extract might help in increasing the platelet count, but it was not the cure of the dengue. But the result was that the people started believing in this papaya leaf extract, and this became a business. So people were, guarding their papaya trees in the houses, like if these were the magic treatment for the cure. They dispensed it into syrups, they dispensed it into capsules, people were selling it. And then there came another myth in which people thought that the red pomegranate juice is the cure for dengue. And then there were so many alternative medicine coming on. But we learned from our neighboring countries, from the experts, and then the government arranged a special training course for the doctors and the field managers, entomologists, and the surveillance teams to get training abroad. So we were sent to Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand, Ministry of Health Sri Lanka helped us, and WHO Collaborating Center for Dengue, which is the biggest collaborating center in Bangkok. They gave us a 3 weeks training session on how to manage this problem. And then we came back. I was also part of that group. And then we came back as master trainers and trained our doctors and nurses. But if I look back, this was such a bad wave of dengue, because every household had a dengue. People were coming in clusters. There was a dengue patient in every house, and people were so scared. So that is then when I came back, I thought of writing a book on dengue for the patients' awareness, to make them aware what this new alien disease is and how to tackle it. So the first edition of the book I wrote in 2012, just after the epidemic, because we knew the dengue is not going to go. If it is here, the vector is here, mosquito is here, and the virus is present in our country, it's going to circulate every year, and every monsoon period when there is collection of water and the breeding sites they develop, the mosquitoes are going to grow, and if they are infected, they are going to spread the disease. So we had to make public aware what this disease is, and at the same time, clear the misconceptions related to this disease. So I wrote the first book as a first edition, which was known as Hum in Dengue. It is in the Urdu language, which is the native language of the country, for easy understanding of everyone. But during the last 10 years, we've been having frequent episodes of dengue, not as huge an epidemic, which we had in 2011, which was the first one, but we had smaller epidemics in different parts of the country every now and then. And then in 2019, the COVID struck in, and whole of the dengue system was on the back door, and on the front was only COVID and COVID and COVID, and people were only talking about, hand hygiene and wearing a mask and not going out. The resultant was that there was no surveillance done in the houses, and the mosquitoes start breeding. And 2020 was a bad year for us, when which we were hit by a very bad epidemic. So at the end of 2020 and 2021, we had a huge epidemic in our country again. And this was the time when I thought that the people have become complacent. Probably they have forgotten about dengue, which was our old enemy, and they're only worried about COVID, which is our new enemy. This is what happens. So I thought this was a good time to do a second edition of a book in which I can share the updated knowledge with the public and make them aware what are the steps that they can do to prevent this disease. If they have symptoms, what to do, what not to do, do's and don'ts. when to contact hospital, what are the serious problems of the disease, how do you manage it, and then what are the updates on the vaccination front. So this is a book which has 8 chapters. The first chapter is about the general aspects of dengue, in which I tell you about what this disease is, where it started, how did it come to Pakistan, how was the situation in 2011, what are the latest figures. In the second chapter, I'm talking about the vector, which is the mosquito, and describing that there are 2 genera of different mosquitoes, Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus, how to differentiate these mosquitoes from the other types of mosquitoes, because you can see them in the surrounding. They have typical shape with black and white spots on their body and legs. For their easy understanding, so people can identify these vector in their surroundings and then report to the healthcare authorities if they find them. And then I also tell them that how these mosquitoes breed, what are their favorite hotspots, what are the sites which are mosquito breeding sites, so that they can, clear out their houses. Because I believe that dengue is a social issue. And unless and until we involve the community and our community participates in the surveillance activities and removes the hotspots, we're not going to control it. Obviously, the government and the health authorities cannot reach each and every house of the country. It is our own responsibility. It's our fight. It's our life. So we have to contribute to this social problem. So I describe about the mosquitoes and their breeding site, their life cycle, and how they transmit the disease. In the third chapter, I tell you about in the book. I tell you about the symptoms and signs of the disease, and I've added some pictures and graphics for the easy understanding of the reader. In the fourth chapter, I tell them about the preventive measures, and I highlight the importance of the preventive measures, solid waste management, and unused items and abundant items in which the rainwater gets accumulated, how to dispose them of, how to clean our houses, how to prevent the bite by wearing protective clothes, fully covered clothes, how to clothe your children during schools, not make them wear shorts or half-sleeve t-shirts, how to apply mosquito repellents and use insect repellents at house or sprays. And then some interesting facts that there are some, if you have a pond in your house or a waterfall in your house or a fountain in your house, you can put larvivorous fish in them. So small tips and techniques for the general public which they can use to prevent themselves. In the fifth chapter, which is about the clinical part of the disease, I tell them that what are the signs and symptoms of dengue, what are different types, which is the serious illness, which is the wild illness, what are the treatment which you can take at home, what are the do's and don'ts, like we tell them not to take the blood thinners or the antibiotics, because this is a viral disease and there's no role of antibiotics or blood thinners, and what are the safe painkillers. You cannot give non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs in these patients. Then comes the sixth chapter, which is the diagnosis. So how do you diagnose it with the help of lab tests? And then in the last chapter, I talk about some of the myths which are related to the dengue, that is nostrum in science. And I tell them that there is no role of this papaya leaf extract or pomegranate juice or, these non-medical alternative medicines, or wearing a ring or, something like that. They are not helpful. And in the ninth and the final chapter, I tell them about the dengue vaccine, that there is a ray of hope at the end of the tunnel, because there are 3 or 4 candidates in the world which are coming up with the vaccines. And the previous vaccine trial, the vaccine which is available was not a major success, and it has very limited use. But there is a hope that we will be having a new dengue vaccine in a couple of months. So I give them a hope. And if I may just show you a book, this is in Urdu, but since we had this on a book panel, I always thought that I should now translate it into English as well. This book is available free of cost. It is for the general public information, and there are some few prefaces from the World Health Organization representative, few of the international dengue experts. Then there are small pictures I've added, different types, what are the do's and the don'ts. Then the hospitals that, what is the situation in the hospitals, I've tried to tell them. I've told them if they develop rash in dengue, what are different types of rash that they can encounter, what to do in them. Then I've also addressed this, orange juice and papaya leaf extract and pomegranate juice as an alternative and dengue. And finally, I tell them about the vaccine of the dengue. So the book is all about my journey from 2011 to 2012, how over the whole decade, I have seen dengue cases in my country, and the knowledge that I have gained from all across the world, I've tried to disseminate it to the other doctors and make them aware, both public and the medical professionals, to tackle this disease better. Thank you.
Somia, thank you so much. And it was, yeah, I'm thinking about the papaya juices and the leaves, and it's very clear that, but also, as you say, your journey and the country's journey since 2011 and the outbreak in 2012 till now, and that really gives a very strong motivation to put together a book or just have a different narrative to reach those probably very diverse and numerous communities, and give some structure in what can seem at certain times a very unstructured time and a very terrifying time, certainly for the community. So thank you. I hope that we have given all our audience, we've given them, whetted their appetite for these 3 books. I'll just take this opportunity to put the covers up on screen. And in a few moments, I'll also share with you some links where the books can be obtained or read. Somia, I have a link for a teaser to your book, but not, I don't know if there's already an online version perhaps. And lots of people definitely will be waiting for the English version. Now you've said it live on air. So we look forward to that. And so I just probably at this point come back to you, Pip. We heard an extract from Alan, and we've heard a lot of the detail about the content of Somia's book. We didn't have a chance to hear from you, Pip, parts of your extract and parts of your book, sorry. And it's really exciting because it's a book about disease. It's also a wonderful kind of journey. It's an explorer's book. And so I'll hand over to you so we can hear a little bit from the book. Thank you, Pip.
Cool. Well, so the book's basically structured. You know, when you go on holiday and everyone's like, how was your trip? I'm sorry, excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
And no one actually cares how your trip is, if I'm honest. So essentially each chapter is something that I can share with the audience, whether it's how to solve problems or you know, the kind of the negative self-talk that we have, how to overcome that. But the chapter on leishmaniasis I call Death and Life. And perhaps in the interest of time, I'll just read you one of the poems that I wrote in it rather than reading a whole extract. But here we go. I should also say where I was bitten was on my neck here. And one of the nurses at the Hospital for Tropical Diseases said, it looks like a love bite by the time my scar had healed up. So I kind of affectionately call it my love bite. And in that vein, I wrote a poem and it's called A Love Letter to a Flesh-Eating Parasite. And I'll read it to you now. You ate away at me, or tried to at least. Piece by piece, you tore my flesh for lunch and considered my nose a soft palate. A potential light snack, something for later, perhaps. An unusual choice of feast. British meat, a rarity. I wouldn't say delicacy, though, although delicate indeed what lies beneath all of us. Flesh, bones, the beating fear of silence. Yet somehow we found each other, entwined over a poorly laid spread. You were rude, if I'm honest. Turned up, unannounced. Hadn't got much in. Well, except my neck. And that was pretty unwashed. Salty mind. It was the best I could do at such short notice. You didn't really introduce yourself properly either. Leishmaniasis. I'm still not sure I'm saying it right. I guess sometimes in the heat of the moment, names don't matter. I know you don't know mine. For what it's worth, I'm sorry it ended so badly. I mean, the scalpel to the neck was probably more painful to me than it was to you. But the drugs, those slow, aching 3 weeks, 21 days, picking apart the damage like an old woman struggling with a zip, that, I'm sure, wasn't fun for you. I know your breakups aren't usually so aggressive, but I figured a decisive ending was for the best. I've heard from others that sometimes you disappear on your own accord. I'd say ghosting, but given the circumstances, that doesn't seem appropriate. I couldn't risk you coming back. I wanted a clean break, you see. I hope you don't mind. My friend said she burnt you. Boiling cow fat, searing into her skin. Seemed like a more painful option. She didn't have a choice. I did think about you, you know, towards the end. I cried tears so salty I thought they could pickle you. They even monitored my heart because of you. It didn't break, but if I think about it hard enough, it might. I thought about you as my blood flowed, analysed to see how far you'd got under my skin. Drugs threatened to close my veins to you as I could no longer close my mind. You've gone. At least we think so. You never really know, though, do you, with lovers that really bury deep? They have a strange habit of turning up again unannounced. I still think about you. Every day, in fact. I see your mark in the mirror, that random love bite. A mark of compassion. For I know you got under my skin and will get under others too. 1 billion, potentially. I know I'm not special to you. Although, please, next time, if you fancy a munch, do call before you pop over for lunch. And I guess that was a little poem. I wanted to bring some, I guess write about tropical diseases in an accessible way.
Wow, Pip. Audience, what do you think? A moment of silence to reflect on that and take it all in. Absolutely brilliant. Funny, terrifying, awful, everything at once. Thank you so much, Pip, and also for sharing that such a personal part of your life. Really incredible. Thank you so much.
No, I was going to say at this point, thank you to everyone who's attending, because I'm guessing you're interested in NTDs. And as someone who's outside of this space, like the more I learn about what everyone's doing, the more I'm just like, wow, you're doing really incredible work. So if ever I can sort of like, I don't know, amplify what you do in any way, let me know.
I think you finished that off, Pip, by saying that what inspired you for the future was to continue to work with the NTD kind of family and sector. And so I think you've inspired a lot of people, certainly from the comments in the chat, that really touched a nerve. And I guess that leads me to my next question, which would be, what are the next steps for you, Pip? Whether it's as an author, whether it's in neglected tropical diseases, or maybe that was it. This was your infection and you've written about it and you've told your story and now you're just going to move completely away from health? Or are you going to be a really strong advocate?
Do you know what? Anyone who knows me, anytime I get a chance to bang on about neglected tropical disease, I'm like, we need to listen. But on that, actually, a question for you guys and the audience is like, what is like the one key message that, if you're talking to a group of people, because I suppose a lot of people come to hear about adventure and like, the grand scale thing and not so much neglected tropical diseases, but if I could get like one message across and consistently nail it, like what would that be? What would help you guys? And yeah, as I say, I am social. I'm on social media and I do use it a lot. So yeah, if I can help amplify. And I think Stephen Braemar in the comments said this would be really impactful generally, the diseases, if we can turn them into movies. And that, I think that's really interesting. Like, how can we bring these issues, like these very, very severe issues, and make it accessible? because that's something that when I was looking for research on leishmaniasis, there weren't any support communities. It all sounded very medical, all very scary. Or you get the headlines like in the Daily Mail, a UK-based tabloid, that's like, explorer gets chemotherapy treatment, and it's scary if you're a patient. And yeah, I think there just needs to be a better way to communicate it. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts.
I think
we were all turning to you.
One of the things that really spurred me on when I came back from 4 decades in Africa was the realization that doctors were graduating from the medical schools around the country had never heard of any of these neglected tropical diseases. Parasitology was avoided, probably because there weren't the expertise in the medical schools. And I took great pleasure in going around maybe 10 or 12 universities every year, and the medical students got one lecture, and I covered the 10 neglected tropical diseases in that one lecture. But there is definitely, apart from the Liverpool School and the London School, Imperial College and Edinburgh, apart from those 4 academic medical schools, and there's very little parasitology taught to doctors who are doing a 6-year, 7-year course, and in the whole 7 years, if they're lucky, they get one lecture on parasites.
That's crazy, isn't it? Just one lecture in a whole 6 years. Bonkers.
Somia, if your book has just recently been published, there must be an overlap with all the COVID infections in Pakistan. And I wondered if you had in any way related the two diseases to each other, or whether there was a sort of combination of effects of people who had both infections.
Yeah, actually, the COVID-19 fourth wave was going on when the dengue epidemic hit, and it was the convergence of 2 epidemics. And it was sometimes very difficult to diagnose actually whether the patient is having COVID or dengue, because the initial symptoms are very similar. They both come with fever and body aches and pains. And many of them, they do not develop respiratory embarrassment in COVID-19. And then also dengue and COVID, both a large chunk can be asymptomatic cases, which are just contacts of patients. So I did try to address that how to differentiate it from other viral illnesses. Like it can overlap with typhoid, it can overlap with malaria, it can overlap with COVID-19. So how to differentiate between them, what are the major signs and symptoms, and what gives you a clue which are you suffering from. So I've tried to educate the patients a little bit about it, but obviously there are not details about the disease in it because this is for general public. But I also do write protocols and diagnostic algorithms for the medical professionals. So in another book of our guidelines, we have a full chapter on COVID and dengue together, and how to differentiate between COVID and dengue. And then if there are any cases of co-infection, how to treat them, because there are cases of both having dengue and COVID at the same time. So we've addressed that, but not in the book as particular, because this is for general public information.
Sure. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Somia. Thank you, Alan, for that question. And I also wonder if, obviously, the neglected tropical disease brand, Professor Molyneux called it a brand. I think sometimes that is what it is. But I wonder if now, for 2 reasons, because of the tropical and because of the neglected, perhaps we're not really looking at it as a global issue because it's tropical, and also for many people, neglected means rare. And I think the sense of the magnitude of the diseases, 1 in 5 people for dengue, it's nearly half the world that is at risk, according to the WHO itself. So maybe we need to rebrand the brand, but obviously that's not practically feasible. But maybe those are some of the issues. I know a lot of people are really shocked to hear it's about 200 million schistosomiasis infections. and it's treatable by a course of pills that costs about 50p and exists and is, as you said, Alan, donated. So there's a big mismatch between what's going on and what people are hearing. So maybe that's one of the things. And with social media, anything can happen. So I suppose I'd like to ask that same question to you, Alan.
Yeah, but I mean,
sorry.
Even if we publicise it within the UK, people sort of would scratch their heads and say, well, what can we do about it? There are one or two organisations which do advertise for the tropical diseases. For instance, Sight Savers have TV adverts asking for the British public to donate £3 to treat trachoma. But we don't do that for SCI. SCI does have a budget of getting on for £20 million every year, which means with that £20 million, they can facilitate the treatment of 60 million children. But getting those messages out and getting those messages out so that they mean something to people has proved to be very difficult, to be honest.
Absolutely. But we've heard your question loud and clear, Pip, and I'm assuming you're completely open for partnering. So if anyone's in the audience and wants to get in touch, yes, hand movements. And so, Alan, I probably want to ask you the same question, although, of course, you're at a very different stage. Next steps. So you've written the book, and will you continue as an author? Are you thinking of a Hollywood production?
I'm very tempted to write another book, but it wouldn't be a medical one. It would be a one on a few more of my stories, perhaps. But who knows how many people would be interested. No, I think the main thing that we've got to continue to do is to make sure. The point is that none of these diseases are transmitted here in the UK. And there are an awful lot of other problems within the UK. I'm sure all of you are very aware of the financial situation in the UK at the moment. And within the last 2 years, the funding which has been going out from the British government to treat these neglected tropical diseases, even though the drugs are free of charge, has been cut. And there is no doubt that charity begins at home. And at the moment, there are many people in the UK who are suffering from the lack of money to carry on their normal life. And so, sadly, I think the balance is wrong, but I can certainly understand how that balance has tipped from previously fully supporting the treatment of 200 million children to actually not treating them at all, which is very sad.
Gosh. Yeah, absolutely. And so, Somia, you've already promised us an English version of the book, so we're going to hold you account.
And looking at these two looking at these two wonderful authors, I think that medical, writing can be very interesting as well. That makes me think that we can write it as a novel or a storybook too. It will be more engaging. And some wonderful comments from the audience of making it into a documentary or an engaging film or a short story kind of a video recording. I think that's a great idea, because we know that the books, people are not into books so much so as they are into watching movies or cartoons or animations. So we do make such material for public awareness from our forum, but I think that making a book because I also contributed some of the parts of the book to the national curriculum for our schools, because we have a chapter on these infectious diseases to make them aware. So I did add COVID and dengue this year to the national curriculum books, both in English and our local language, Urdu. But making a storybook for children on these, diseases and making them aware is also a very good idea. And maybe with wonderful writers like Alan and Pip, this is going to be a very successful project.
Thank you. It's a good idea.
Fantastic. And for those of you who've been to the festival in previous years, you might remember the participation of MTV Sugar. It's kind of a series aimed at adolescents and young adults. And it's actually a public health program. I think it started off to, the aim was really to encourage people to get tested for HIV. And it kind of went from there. That was one of Lupita Nyong'o's first roles. Mr. Nigeria has been acting in it. And so very interestingly, they have weaved in a lot of public health topics, and even now broadening it to wider sexual and reproductive health, but also gender issues, anything from domestic violence to mental health. All that to say, but it's very MTV, so it's really appealing to that kind of teenager demographic. And I think if we can harness different kinds of audiences and momentums in lots of different ways, that will be great. Now, most of us spent the lockdown on Netflix, and I would hate to end the book panel on the suggestion that we should move to audiovisual because there's something really special about books. I think we all had a chance to just fall silent for a few minutes and just really listen to the written word, and there will always be something very, very special about that. So I do hope that in the audience, but also amongst our authors here on screen, there are many more books on disease, on health in the making. And we will be very much watching this space and keeping in touch. We've had lots of different kinds of books on this panel, from crime stories around infectious diseases to poetry last year, If God is a Virus, and so forth. So it's always a real pleasure to hear from our authors. I realize I have kept you for almost 15 minutes longer than we wanted, so I do apologize for that, and we're incredibly grateful. I think there was a lot to talk about in your very rich books. Before we do go, I'll just share again the covers of the 3 books. By all means, let's all keep in touch, and definitely, there we go. Life Lessons from the Amazon, a guide to life from one epic jungle adventure. Absolutely, Pip Stewart. A Tale of a Man, a Worm, and a Snail. The story of Alan Fenwick's life in schistosomiasis, but also of the Schistosomiasis Control Initiative, a wonderful organization who has done so much for the delivery of the treatments we mentioned. And Somia, your book, Dengue Us. I won't try to say it in Urdu. Perhaps you can.
Hum or dengue. Hum is us, or and dengue.
Dengue. Yeah, Hum or Dengue by Dr. Somia Iqtadar. The links are in the chat. And so any questions, please carry on and continue the conversation with our authors. And so for all of those who tuned in today, thank you so much. And again, another big round of applause for our authors today. You've really inspired us, and I'm finally going to go get my cup of tea and then browse your books. I finished yours, Alan. I managed to do that.
That's the only one who has, I'm sure. It's a long read.
No, it's great, really great. And Pip, I'm working my way through yours, and I'll enjoy relaxing with that. Somia, I can't wait to see the English version. And let's keep in touch. Let's meet again very, very soon.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the wonderful response from the audience.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Take care.
Blessed everyone. Bye.